Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, is for anyone interested in leadership and the wins, losses, and lessons of being an executive. We are two women who have successfully navigated C-Suite roles and are sharing our experiences. We will be bringing on guests to tell their stories and want to spark honest conversation and discussion, which may include swearing and lots of laughs. Join us on this adventure. Welcome to another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, where we delve into the minds of today's top leaders to uncover the secrets behind their success. I'm Juliette Clothier, and I'm joined by my collaborator, Susan Sutherland. We have a very special guest with us today, Scott E. Miller of Scott Miller Executive Search. We'll properly introduce Scott in a couple of minutes. I want to start by taking a little time to talk about the Olympics today, Susan.
Well, that'll be fun.
I know it's on right now, and I bet this podcast will be dropping after the Olympics, but it sure has been fun. But the other night I saw synchronized diving, and for some reason when I was watching it, I was thinking a lot about the verbal and nonverbal communication that they have to have when they're up there on the diving boards. I guess that's what they're called. Maybe stands?
Sometimes they're platforms.
Platforms, that's it. Okay. Anyway, I thought about the verbal and nonverbal communication required in the sport. And of course, that's true for any sport, but watching their precision, it just reminded me of the importance of communication in all we do. And I often find leadership cues in watching things that normally wouldn't be thought of leadership moments, but it felt like a leadership moment to me.
So let me just take a quick digression on that point, and then we'll talk about the synchronized diving. I have, since we started this podcast, which, as you know, is not terribly long in time, everything resonates for me through the filter of leadership. Is there a leadership lesson here? Is there a leadership opportunity here? And it is amazing to me how many metaphors we can also find around that. So I think some of it's that we are thinking a lot about this podcast and about these questions, and we're finding them pretty much everywhere. So anyway, back to synchronized diving. I think the thing that strikes me about that is that how much training goes into the synchronization and the teamwork that goes into it. So part of it is they're communicating in a way that's below the line. Like it's so, they're probably looking at each other out of the corner of their eyes. There isn't that direct, what are you trying to say to me? Because they've done all that in practice 100 times, right? But they have to be in tune. So it's really interesting to me about, I think you had mentioned this the other day, is it the precision that creates the communication clarity, or the clarity of the communication that creates the precision?
True. And I think in my experience as kind of the second in command in a lot of companies, being the CFO or COO or CAO, you have to have that precision in communication with the CEO. And that's something that if it's off, it doesn't work.
Yeah, so, belly flop, right?
There you go. I love it.
Which is never fun to see.
Yeah. With that, I'm going to introduce our guest. Our guest today is Scott Miller. Scott is the principal of Scott Miller Executive Search. It's a national firm that he founded in 2009, which specializes in the education and nonprofit sectors with a keen focus on diversity. With over 35 years of experience in leading retained executive search firms, Scott has an unparalleled depth of knowledge in executive level professional services and the public sector. I first met Scott when he worked as a client partner at Korn Ferry International San Francisco office. He worked in their nonprofit and education practice, as well as the diversity practice for 9 years. His expertise doesn't stop there. He also served as the Western Regional Staffing Manager for Watson Wyatt Worldwide, establishing a robust 9-office regional recruitment function. Scott's career is marked by his work with prominent firms like the Alexander Group and Spencer Stuart, where he recruited mid to upper level management candidates and served as an outsourced human resources and recruitment firm for the nation's largest private utility. His journey began in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Department of Labor and the White House in presidential personnel, focusing on affirmative action and equal employment opportunity. Scott is not only a seasoned professional, but also a dedicated community leader. He holds board positions at the Pomeroy Recreation and Rehabilitation Center, the Bread Project, and Start Out, among others. His past contributions include serving on the boards of the San Francisco SPCA and GLAAD, where he held various leadership roles. Hi, Scott. That's
Hello.
a lot. You've done a lot. I love it.
Well, I like
Love
to
it.
keep busy.
Yeah, well, you must. You must. So I wanted to start out today and talk about your journey because, first of all, when I saw the White House, that ding, 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 that got me really excited about asking you questions about how that came about and how you got into this business.
Well, it's interesting because everybody comes into search from so many different angles, but for me, it always had that HR bent to it. Having started, right out of college, answering phones in the Secretary of Labor's office, and then working for the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, which ensures that all businesses that have government contracts don't discriminate against women, minorities, the disabled, and Vietnam era veterans. And I worked for the director of that agency, who later became assistant secretary. And then my first boss from labor was at the White House. And when I had the opportunity to go there to work in presidential personnel and interviewing candidates for positions within the administration, of course, I jumped at that. After the change in administration in 93, my boss had been recruited by Spencer Stuart for a position, but then they created one for her within the firm. And she wanted me to come work for her again. And that was 31 years ago this month.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I was at Spencer Stuart. I was at the Alexander Group. I was at Watson Wyatt, and then was a partner at Korn Ferry for 9 years, and then been out on my own now for 15.
Wow, 15 years. Okay.
Yeah.
What made you decide to go out on your own?
Well, it was the market kind of helped make that decision, with Korn Ferry's minimum fee now being roughly, all the big firms are probably around 150,000. When you're in the nonprofit practice and the education practice, that's not where fees can be, because they just can't afford that unless you're the national organization, the CEO or the president of a university. They're not going to be able to pay that kind of fee. So for me, it was kind of like an economic decision. I want to continue what I'm doing. And it made sense because, I don't have to worry about those minimum fees when I'm working for myself.
That's right. You can set the
So it was a great time to leave. It was a great divorce. It was a great, it was, and we still get together with the group of people from Korn Ferry. It was a great experience, but it gave me the experience I needed to be out on my own too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And Susan?
Yeah, I'm curious if you can share a little bit about what are the highlights about working in a setting as a recruiter versus working for yourself as a recruiter. It's sort of a compare and contrast between being on your own versus being in an organization.
I do miss the collaboration. I do miss that, but you don't have to worry about the internal politics. You don't have to worry about those Monday meetings and okay, what's your bill and collected this week? What's in the pipeline? You don't have to worry about that. Whether you work for a firm or you work for yourself, you still eat what you kill. But the pressure of having to have all the overhead and all of that you have with a big firm, plus the internal politics of any firm, and the firm had offices worldwide. I would say the San Francisco office of this firm was fantastic. I can't say that about all the other offices, but it was a really great environment. Nonetheless, 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, I was doing the parade walk around. Hi, how are you? Hi. Doing all that stuff that you have to do. When you're on your own, you're just focused on your clients. You don't have to worry about all the internal politics. The only thing I have to worry about is my dog going to be barking in the background. That's it.
And is your client happy with you today? Right?
Yeah. I mean, that's it. So that's the flip side of it. Not as much collaboration, but you don't have to worry about all the internal stuff as you would with any firm.
Right.
That's true.
Great. That's thank you. That's really great. Because that's one of the themes that both Juliet and I bring to the table in our conversations is we've both worked in corporations and in organizations, and we've also worked on our own. And the compare and contrast is always fascinating because it doesn't work for everybody.
No, it's tough. You have to be motivated. Because not only do you have to be executing on your work and providing excellent candidates and a process for your client, you also have to be out there, beating the bushes. You have to be mindful of, I need to meet with this many people. I need to have this many phone calls. It's the whole, it's the whole relationship management and business development piece of it that's really important. Who do you keep going back to for your clients that you want continued work? That's always the best, and having them be referrals for you. But at the end of the day, when you do good work or great work, people are going to talk about it.
Right.
There's been
Clients,
so many
candidates, all of them will.
Yeah. There's been so many ebbs and flows. I mean, there always is, but in 15 years of your practice, just the ups and downs in the market, obviously things changed during the pandemic. And so how do you manage that piece of it? Just you're working for yourself, you're the CEO of your company, and how have you managed when things have been going well and when things have been kind of taken a little bit of a downturn or taking longer to place candidates, or even the labor market?
Well, I mean, I will say any search typically takes between 4 to 6 months, roughly on average, from start to finish. That being said, on average, well, let me step back. COVID really changed things as far as, it was great to have everybody on Zoom, and that made it a lot easier instead of having to be in person. I mean, the ease of that and the access for candidates, so they didn't have to sit there and travel across town and to meet with a client, have to worry about parking. You can sit at your desk and you're able to do that. And the accessibility and the ease of that made it a lot easier for people instead of having to take up a half day to make themselves available for an hour meeting. That was fantastic. The challenge was it was easier for people because everything is digital. There's lack of connection, and that lack of connectivity allowed for people to pull out of a process. In the past, of the 10, 12, 14 searches that I work on a year, I would have maybe over the course of a year, maybe 3 or 4 people pull out of a process complete, that's it. What happened during the pandemic and after, I'd have 3 or 4 people pull out per search. Because it was easy, because there was that lack of connectivity. It's easy for people to say, okay, I don't know, this isn't the right thing. I'm not sure. I'll take a pass. I don't know if this is the right thing for me. Well, it's because you don't have that connectivity. You're not able to see the people. You're not able to fall in love with the client. You're not able to go through that dating process. It's easy just to walk away from it. So what I came up with after that, I said, okay, first round could be digital, maybe even second, but we've got to have live meetings no matter what. I don't care if the search committee is around the country, in different cities. We've got to have some aspect that's in person for the person to be able to start to make the connection with the organization, because it's easier. It's harder to say no once you've met people live.
I think it's also in the digital Zoom world, it's easy to throw your hat in without really thinking through how serious you are. It's easier to date, to use your metaphor, because it isn't too painful to not have the next date.
Whereas it's easy to walk away.
It's easy to walk away. So there's a piece of it's connectivity, but it's also that the on-ramp to it is much easier. They have to really, in the virtual world, in the non-virtual world, when you used to have to go to an office and meet a real person and then follow it up with a second interview in person, that's a commitment, and you took it seriously, I think.
And wearing pants.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Susan. There's less of a seriousness, and there's less of but people aren't taking it as serious. They'll dip their toe in the water, but it's easy for them just to say, okay, water's too cold, I'm interested. I
have a totally different question, and I'm going to ask it even though it's kind of a little risky question. Are you seeing any differences in generational response to the process?
Yes.
Yeah, because that was my intuition, that Juliet and I would take a virtual process as seriously as we would take an in-person process. But I don't know that that's true for people who grew up with technology, who are millennials, who are...
People that are experienced in working with a firm or a search firm and know what's expected, it's a lot easier because they know what's expected. They know what they need to do. They know that they have to show up. I think for a lot of people, ghosting happens, it's like, this is, folks, you don't know when you're going to run into these people again. You might run into this person 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. And you know what? They're going to remember if you pulled something like that. You just can't do that. That's not standard protocol. That's not good business. And you wouldn't want to be treated that way. It's like, then there's just lack of a commitment, or excuse me, less of a commitment to a process, and the understanding that going through a process is still good, because, you know, you could be helping the client. You could learn stuff about yourself or the job that you might want next, but you're not going to know until you go through a process. But don't commit to something if you're not going to see it through.
Right. I think that's really important. I think too, you know, I was joking a couple seconds ago just about not wearing pants and the virtual interviews. But I think for me, when I've had online interviews and Zoom interviews, I do get dressed as though I was going into the office, and I want my backdrop to look like I'm in an office setting, and I want people to see that I'm a professional. And I think the word professional has changed over time. And I know that, you know, at least in downtown San Francisco, very few people are wearing suits anymore. And, you know, it
depends on the city. You know, I was in DC last month and, you know, had lunch. It was a Thursday or even a Friday. People still in suits.
Okay. So maybe it's
different, but in another city, New York, here, you know, what I've seen recently, people are still wearing suits. It is very different here, but you're
Cincinnati.
right. You have to show up. And it's like, if you ask me, what should I wear? What's the dress code for the client? That's one thing, but sometimes I'm like, okay, this is not a good judgment call. I would not have done this. And you're meeting with the client, and this it's going to be it could be reflective. They might care, they might not, but don't give someone an excuse to say no.
Do you meet with the candidate before the Zoom call starts so you can see what they're wearing?
I meet with the candidate. We talk for an hour to 2 hours before I even present them their resume before that. Then I prepare them for it. So they've already spent, you know, hour and a half, 2 hours with me before I even put the resume forward. I walk through the backgrounds with the client and say, this is why you should see these individuals. Here are their strengths. Here's what they don't have, because no one has everything. And then when they decide who they want to see, I spend time. Here's what they're going to be looking for. Here's the focus. Here's what you need to be ready for. And I'm in those meetings too. So that's helpful as well.
Yeah.
To help moderate.
On that note, I'm popping in for a quick word. Hi, Susan here. And I'm really excited to share that I'm offering a group coaching program starting this October. The Meant for More Mastermind is a 4-month online group coaching program for senior leaders and executives age 45 plus who want, more for themselves from their roles, their careers, their lives. A mastermind, in case you're not familiar, is a type of group coaching experience which also emphasizes your connection to peers, senior leaders and executives who get it and who know what it's like to be in your shoes. The Meant for More Mastermind creates a dedicated space and opportunity for you and your peers to get individualized support and executive life coaching while you connect with each other so you can all grow and take action and be more of who you want to be at this time in your career. Isn't it time for you to feel successful on your terms and to be in charge of your authentic leadership? So if you're a senior leader or executive who knows or suspects that there's room for you to grow, I'd love for you to explore this opportunity. You can find a link to the program in the show notes, and I'd love to speak with you directly. So please reach out via the email in the show notes. And now back to the podcast episode in progress. I imagine that you've been, in spite of all of that preparation, that there've probably been a moment or two when you've been taken by surprise.
Yes.
Can you elaborate?
Constantly. Well, as I said before, in my 30 years of doing this, I am not able to control people. Unfortunately, I've not learned how to do that. And so people constantly surprise me. We have the most, executive recruiters have the most unpredictable commodity, and that's humans. So no matter how long I've been doing this, I'm still surprised from time to time. Not as much, but sometimes people will still surprise you.
Absolutely. Any stories to share?
What kind of story do you want to hear?
Well, I think, one of the things I think that, the hardest part is knowing how truthful people are being or not.
That doesn't happen that often at this level. That's why we do background checks. So they do that and if you're going in for a CFO role, you have to have the credit check depending on that, that kind of stuff, that's normal. But at this level, at the C level, you don't have that. It happens once in a while. I remember one search, I just happened to call a friend of mine, and we were just getting caught up. And then I said, "Oh, by the way, I met this person that you used to work with." I was, really impressed with them. And they said, "Oh, well, they were fired because they had an affair with their secretary." And I was like, "What?"
Hello.
And then the partner I was working on the search with made a phone call. And then my friend just happened to volunteer the information. I wasn't like I was looking for. I just mentioned, "Oh, I met this person." It was, very, just matter of fact. Well, we found out that this had happened somewhere else as well.
A serial affair.
Yes. Well,
and faster on the draw than I was there, Juliette.
It was bad.
Yeah. And I think,
and we're giggling, and I realize I'm jumping in and ahead of you, Juliette. We're giggling because it wasn't us in that transaction. And for you, that must have been not so fun.
Well, it was good. I always say I'd rather find this out now when everything happens, and if anything plays out, I always say it's better to know this now than after we've started.
Absolutely.
Better, and when those things happen, they always work out for the better. And I've never been through a search where someone pulled out or for some other reason, whatever it is, where down the road, the person we found was much better. So it's, and again, sometimes it's just about timing too. And that's something you can't control in people's lives.
What a great perspective to have, though, that when stuff goes sideways, to trust, because of all your experience, that in the end, it usually works out. I tell this to clients all the time. I say, trust the process. Yeah.
And I was going to ask you that question of what is the best advice, or the advice that you give to both clients and candidates as they're going through the process?
Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the candidate is set up for success, and it's going to be a position that they're going to be successful in. You don't want to mess with people's lives. I mean, I don't want to take someone in and put them in a situation where they're going to be set up for failure. That's not right. I mean, ultimately, the client is who I am ultimately responsible to. But at the end of the day, I also want to make sure that the candidates are the right person for the job. And so if you put a good process in place, that should work out. I mean, I remember one time I was working on a search, and the search committee was leaning toward one candidate, and they were going into the final interviews with the final two individuals. And the search committee was like, "Oh, this is going to be a slam dunk. This is going to be a slam dunk." And I kept saying, trust the process. Well, candidate A came into the final interview with the board, and I don't know what it was, but came in with I don't know if it was a chip on the shoulder or it was an attitude, whatever it was a stark contrast to the other individual. And the other individual was amazing. And at the end of the day, they came out of that, and the whole search committee and board had completely changed their mind. Wow. And they went with that individual, and it was the best choice. Looking back now, 8 years later, it was just head and shoulders above the other individual what would have happened. And I'm on that board now. So it was incredible to see that process play out. And to see, it's like, you know what, this is it will all come out. It will all work itself out. And it did. It was fantastic.
I have another squirrely question, or maybe it's not so squirrely, but do you decide with your clients, do you have an agreement around re-recruiting the people that you've placed?
Well,
is there a statute of limitations?
Yes, there is. I'm a firm believer because I'm so involved in the process that I guarantee for a year. That's the work. That's what I did when we were at Korn Ferry, and I feel strongly about that. And because I'm so part of the process, if I wasn't, that might be different. Some of my brothers and sisters in executive search and nonprofit executive search are doing 6 months or even less than that. Now, if I were doing a mid-level search, I would probably say 6 months, because the stick to itiveness of that of a mid-level. Sometimes I do help out clients and build out development departments. It's harder to keep. That being said, for senior level, yes, it's a year, and I think that's really important. But
yeah.
again, a lot of people are shying away from that, and I've had to do more redos. But it's like, but I don't, just one. That's it.
It's interesting because a year is not that long for a senior leader to get in and feel grounded and ready to.
But I think it's also the nice thing, at least what I learned when I was at Korn Ferry. The great thing about that is, and while they talk about, it forces you to have the conversation with the client. So it's not just we check in 1 year later. You're checking in every other month, talking to the candidate. How are things going? You're talking with the client. How are things going? Because that way, sometimes you can course correct and say, hey, did you think about having a coach for this? Hey, what I would recommend is this based on other organizations I've been involved with, whether that's the 300 plus clients I've worked with over the years, or if it's been boards that I have real life experiences can talk to, from being board chair, development committee chair, or governance committee chair. I can speak to that in another way about this is how I would recommend. Have you thought about this or that? So it's easy to kind of get people over the hump because, there are always going to be some bumps when someone starts new within an organization. So but by touching base at every 2 or 3 months, you become a trusted thought partner. It's not just throwing a bunch of resumes on the wall and see what sticks. It's actually having that consultative approach to where when a client calls you about something that might not even be related to that search, you're seen as a thought partner. You're seen as someone that they can come to and ask questions. And that's what you want to be. So when they hear from someone else and can make a recommendation for me that, because at the end of the day, you're paying a lot of money for a firm to do the work. So it's like, get your money's worth, get your value. Don't just, be a resume shuffler. You've got to be more than just that. At least that's the way I look at it.
Well, and that obviously works to your advantage in so many ways. You then become somebody they want to refer as being not only really good at the resume work and bringing the right candidates in, but helping that process after it's happened.
Way after, it's good because you keep in touch. So you are top of mind. It's that whole consultative approach. So when they hear of something or they have something else internally, they're going to call you.
Yeah.
I'm going to pivot a little bit. I have a specific question or tying diversity into a lot of our conversations. And I think in recruitment, that can be particularly challenging at times. And I think you focused on it. So I want to hear more. And what I've done recruiting is really trying to focus on having diversity and bringing someone in who thinks differently or is from a different background. That's not always easy, not just because of the tone at the top, but because of the pool of candidates that where you are located, things like that. So I just wondered how you deal with that. And I know that it's something that you're passionate about.
Well, I mean, it's because I started my career working on affirmative action and equal employment opportunity issues at the Department of Labor. It's something that's just the lens I look through. So I think especially when you're working in the California market, you've got to show that diversity you've got to lead with it. If you're not, I don't think you're doing a good job as a recruiter. You've got to have diverse pools. It's like it's a given. If you look back at my career and the people I've placed, it's been roughly 67% women and people of color, and other diverse communities. So I think that's important. But at the end of the day, it's their choice. It's the decision they have to make. It's not your choice. And that's also something that was a hard learning for me at one point. It's like, no matter how much you care, you're not there setting that person up for success day to day. So as long as you provide a diverse pool, it's up to them to make that selection.
Right, because they can't make a choice around the diversity of a candidate if the pool isn't diverse.
Right.
Like it's like a cornerstone, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting too, when I kick off CEO searches, and a lot of times they'll say, we want to make sure we have a diverse pool. And I'll say, okay, who's on your search committee? Do you have, what's the diverse makeup? And if there isn't any, I'm like, how are you going to recruit somebody? Because the first thing, if you're going to have someone that's diverse coming in, they're going to look for people around the table that look like them. And if they don't have that, it's like, what's your commitment to this? That's a lot of lip service. Oh, we've got work to do. Well, yeah, you do. So what are you going to do about this? You can't just, you've got to do more than that. So you've got to broaden your pool, or maybe you don't have a diverse board. Then maybe you need to bring on a staff member. Maybe you need to bring on someone to the search committee that's a community, someone that's involved in the community, or donor, or supporter, something like that. But it's like you can't just do that and go in and say, there's nothing we can do about this.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell
you're going to be purposeful. And it's like, if you're serious about this, if you want a diverse pool and you want a diverse hire, then you've got to have diversity at that search committee.
That's great advice.
I want to tell a quick story about when I was in corporate and I was doing the search for the search firm, right? So we interviewed 4 or 5 different search firms for a pretty senior job. And we were able to rule out one of the big names in the room because they presented with 4 white guys. Like, that was their team that they brought. Nothing against white guys, but it was sort of, yeah. But if you were in a team, wouldn't you like to be with at least a woman, or right? So
you got to be. It's got to be purposeful, and it's also you have to be mindful. But that also tells me it's like they weren't thinking about that.
Or maybe they were, and they brought their best.
But that's the problem I find so much when it comes to I think that organizations, they do take this seriously, but you can't just, that can't be your first thing, bringing someone in. You've got to have, your board's got to be diverse. You've got to be thinking about that. You can't just, you can't just say, well, you've got to start somewhere. And it can't be with the CEO. It's got to be at the board level, because that's where your commitment is, and that'll show. Right. If you're serious, but you've got to have. But so many times as we go through life, sometimes people just don't think about it, and they bring their friends in to the board, and they don't think about it. They're not purposeful about, we need someone of color, we need more women, we need someone from this community, we need someone with this kind of background, we need stronger finance people, we need someone with realists, whatever it is, fill in the blank. You've got to be purposeful about when you're recruiting, whether that's for a CEO, whether that's even for your board members on your nonprofit.
Right. That's great. I have 2 more questions. Well, they're tied together. So to wrap us up, I wanted to see if you could give us some advice for candidates and for clients. Like, what is the few pieces of advice that you would give when someone is on the hiring end and someone is on the job search end?
From the candidate perspective, let the process play out. Don't try to oversell yourself. Don't be too excited. It's going to play out the way it plays out. And there's nothing you can do about it. And if you're not the selected person, that means that they saw something else. And it doesn't mean you were a bad candidate. It just means they leaned more towards somebody else because of X, Y, or Z. And I try to be as honest with the candidates so they can kind of understand the process of the conversation that happened with the board, or with the leadership of the organization when a senior hire is made, so they can kind of understand, okay, this isn't about them. It's that they lean toward this other candidate because of X, Y, or Z. Whatever it is, it's like I try to. They've done me a favor. That's the least I can do is have an honest conversation to kind of help them understand the mindset and what happened in the conversation. It doesn't mean you're a bad candidate. It just means they lean toward this other person for another reason. So that's what I try to tell people. It's going to play out, and you have to trust it. On the client side, I would say you don't want to be a tire kicker. You've got to, if you see someone that you're serious about, let's not wait through a process, because it's a much more competitive landscape out there. People are having more opportunities out there, entertaining more things, and aren't talking about it as much. And so you don't want to take too long in a process, but you also don't want to. You don't need to see 20 people. My job is because we've spent so much time, my job is to show you a pool of 6, 8, 10 people, maybe 12 all in. But it's like, there's no one's going to be perfect. What can you do to set them up? That there is no perfect candidate who can do the job. I don't want you I don't want a client to give up what they think is important, but also realizing that there is no perfect person. And sometimes that's kind of hard.
I'm hearing just a little bit of dating advice in there too, which is if you really like someone, you might want to let them know, rather than playing so hard to get that you lose the people because they want to see some enthusiasm for the candidacy.
Bring up a good point. I think that's one thing that organizations forget. This is a recruiting process, not an application process. And so the organization, whether that's the leadership team or whether that's the board, you got to put your marketing hats on. You got to put your marketing hats and market to the candidates. But it's interesting because I'm there and see everything. I start to see when that happens. I get to see when the client starts to fall in love with the candidate, or the the leadership starts to fall in love with the candidate. I get to see that. I get to see what brings them together. So that's great. But again, a lot of people forget that this is a recruiting process.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I have to remind them, it's like you got to market to the candidates. They want to go to a place that they feel like if they're going to make a move and they're going to make a jump, that they've got to make sure that this is the right place for them.
Right.
That's right. With that, I think that is great advice, and I'm going to listen to some of that myself because I am doing a bit of marketing on my end, and that's great advice. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. This has been wonderful. This is another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back in 2 weeks or so with another episode, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for having me.
This is great, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, Juliet.
Is that it?
That's it.
You got what you need?
We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please tell your friends and coworkers about us, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed listening. Secrets of the C-Suite is produced by Juliet Clothier, Susan Sutherland, and Brian Clothier. Original music is by Brian Clothier, and the podcast is inspired by leaders like you.